What's going on, everybody? This is Brent0331. Appreciate you guys tuning in. In this episode of Interview with Warfighters, we have Gunnery Sergeant Ryan Stevens, United States Marine Corps retired. He served with SIC and Anglico, MARSOC and NSW DEVGRU. He did a total of 10 combat deployments in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Somalia, serving as a JTAC. He's the recipient of 2 Purple Hearts and a Bronze Star. And here he is, Gunnery Sergeant Ryan Broski. I assume Broski is your call sign. Stevens, United States Marine Corps retired. Welcome, brother.
Hey, thanks for having me, Brent.
Yeah, man, absolutely. So let me just say that, I was introduced to you by a mutual friend of ours that works with the Wounded Warriors Project. So very grateful that he put you and I in touch and was able to facilitate this happening. So big thanks to him.
Yeah, definitely. He's a good dude.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so let's go back, man. Let's start at the very beginning. You know, what made you want to join the U.S. military? What made you want to be a United States Marine?
Well, initially I didn't want to serve at all. I graduated high school in 2002, and small town, Strong, Maine. And initially I kind of did what the teachers were suggesting you do is, you go to college and you kind of do that route. And so that's kind of the route that I was taking. I entered my first year of college at University of Maine at Farmington. Didn't know what I wanted to do. I mean, it's kind of the way it is in life, I think. Sometimes you just don't have a path that you're ready to walk down. So I went undecided. I was kind of just I was kind of on the baseball track. Like I love baseball all growing up, and I played, from Little League all the way up until Legion. And so I was kind of, I had it in my mind that I was going to be, a pro or semi-pro, baseball player. But my first year of college kind of, it went, I went into college under academic probation, so I wasn't able to actually play with the university, so I was just sitting the bench, really. So my second year would have been my opportunity to actually play college ball. And then, after my first year of college, I got into a lot of trouble. I just hanging out with the wrong crew, and like most people, when you're when you're bored and you don't have a job, or I worked a lot, but my off time was when I would get into a little bit of trouble. So drinking and smoking with the boys and four-wheeling and stuff got me in line with the cops, and I tried to outrun the cops on a four-wheeler. I successfully evaded them for quite a while, but eventually they caught up to me. And the state policeman that arrested me ended up he was a Marine. He had done 4 years in the Marine Corps, and on the way down to the station we had a chat, and he's like, "Hey man," he's like, I see your record. He's like, "You're not really headed in the right direction." He's like, "There's kind of a fork in the road right now, because I got rolled up, evading, resisting arrest, operating after suspension, DUI, like the charges were stacking up. It was looking like, up to a year in prison at this point. So I had prior charges. So it was definitely on my mind at that point. Like, he's like, "Hey dude, like, you could sit in prison, or maybe potentially get in the Marine Corps, or any service really, at that point." So I started checking out my options after I got bailed out. And so at the time, I looked at the Army. I wasn't really set on any service. Like, I didn't know anything about any of that stuff at this point. Like, I was pretty oblivious to the armed services. My parents didn't serve. I had some uncles that had served in Vietnam, and my grandfather was a Korean War vet. But it wasn't like a generational thing in my family where, every generation had served in a certain service or whatnot that you do see throughout the U.S. So I checked out the Army because at the time the Army only had like a 2-year. You could do a 2-year stint, and I kind of wanted to do like combat engineer type stuff where I could do electrical work or at least learn a trade because I had it in my mind that I wasn't going to stay in. I was just going to do my stint, kind of reorder my life a little bit, and then get back on a path, So I looked into the Army, and then, at the time, my cousin was a Marine recruiter in Maine. He was actually in my area. So I had him come over, and, this feels pretty good. So I signed up. Initially, I thought I was going to be a combat engineer, but once I got to boot camp, I found out that I had gone in open contract, and you don't get to pick your career when you go in open contract. So the drill instructors let me know real quick that that I wasn't going to get to pick. So that was kind of their jokes through the entire boot camp process. I didn't find out, my MOS until MCT. So once we got through MCT, how you're sitting on the bleachers and they're like rattling off MOSs and they're like, 0621, and I'm like, I don't even know what that is, dude. And people are like, you're a radio operator. I'm like,
great. What year was that, Ryan?
Oh man, so I enlisted November of 2003. I graduated boot camp, I think February 2004. So yeah, a little bit after that. Yep.
Awesome. And I forgot to plug your book. You got a new book out called Out of the Darkness. So if you guys haven't seen this, make sure you check it out. This is Ryan's book. So wanted to get that out there. Sorry, I left that out of the intro there.
It's okay. Yeah. Yeah, I'll plug it now, so I don't have to talk about it later. And I don't want to be that guy that just says, buy my book. But Out of the Darkness, how a special operation Marine found the light. It's basically my story from, a little bit about my childhood into going into the Marine Corps. So there's one chapter in there that writes about the entire police chase. So all the details on that. And then just basically my time in the Marine Corps. And then a good portion of the book is some of the missions that I went on. And then I kind of transitioned into basically some of the hardships that I went through in the Marines and in special operations. Some of the stuff that, more guys are starting to talk about now, PTSD, traumatic brain injury, the going over multiple times over and over again, and then how that degrades your health. And I mean, it destroys families. If you're not centered in the right things, I didn't find Christ until the end of my time in. So, but that's kind of been a process that I've used since, retirement that has, healed me of, PTSD and some of the traumas that I went through. So you could buy the book at my farm website, Full Armor Farm, or it's available on eBay too. I self-published. It's kind of just a thing that I had where I wanted the book to be printed in the U.S. and I had some issues getting it through publishers and stuff in the initial processes. So it was kind of just like, I felt like God was pointing me to just do it myself. So that's kind of what we did. It was kind of fun, actually, once you figured out that it wasn't that hard, writing your own book, just, getting an editor to do some of the work for you. And then, doing the cover design and then, all that stuff. So it was actually a fun process, and then sending it to the printer. And we were fortunate that we have a a printing house right 25 minutes away that printed the book. So my thing was trying to just keep, everything made in Maine, so it was printed in Maine, the paper's from Maine, so it's all USA made too. So that's kind of my thing.
That's awesome. Well, let's go back to so you're bringing up that you went in open contract. You received the MOS as a radio operator, so you went to MCT. For those of you who don't know, it's Marine Combat Training. So essentially, when you get out of recruit training, you go to the School of Infantry. Every Marine, regardless whether you're going to be an infantry or not. And if you don't have an infantry MOS, you go to MCT, Marine Combat Training. And then after that, and essentially it's just basic infantry training. And then after that, you get sent to your respective MOS school. If you have an infantry MOS, you stay at SOI for a lot longer. So you do your basic infantry stuff, and then you go to assume comm school, where like 29 Palms.
Yeah, so I went to comm school in 29 Palms, I think, and then that's where at the end of comm school they you get to pick. You either get to pick or you get told where you're going to go for your first units. Fortunately at the time, Anglico had just stood back up, and Anglico was at the time it was a Marine liaison element, which was just 4-man teams, and then supporting arms liaison teams, which are usually like 6 to 8 man teams that were attached to the MU and provide fire support. And then they basically reestablished Anglico, which was Air Naval Gunfire Liaison Company, and that kind of gave more authorities for you to attach to different units, not just the MEF. So during my time in Anglico, we attached to Army, Navy. I mean, I worked with the SEALs, the various Army like MIT teams, military training teams, and stuff like that, and then even Marine Corps infantry units that we attached to. So it was it was kind of cool. So at the time at school, they opened that up and said, hey, we need a bunch of guys. It was basically going to be a boot drop of guys to Anglico to basically start plussing up Anglico to get ready to start sending them to Iraq. So luckily I had one of our comm guys, comm teachers or instructors. He was a prior recon guy, so he kind of knew what Anglico was. So he pitched it. His pitch was like, hey, if you want to jump out of aircraft and dive, like go to this unit, you might have a chance of doing that. And I was like, well, I'm scared of heights, man. And I'm like, but it's better than 8th Comm. So I was like, yeah, I'll go. And so I got orders to 2nd Anglico in Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, and I showed up there. I think I got there around September of 2004-ish, and then first deployment, I think it was 6 months later. We basically did a quick workup. I attached to a FIC team, so a firepower control team, basically a 4-man team, comprised of, you'd have, at the time when we first stood up, we had mainly officers who were the JTAC role, and they were usually either doing an air officer route, so they were a pilot, or they were an 08, so they were a fire support officer. And then you'd have 3 enlisted guys typically on the team. You'd have one fire chief, who was an 08-6-1, and then usually 2 junior guys, either, well, not technically, you'd have a radio operator too, so an 06-21, and then usually one junior guy who's either an 06 or an 08 on the team. So my first deployment was 2005. We went to Al Anbar province. We did one of the initial pushes into hit was I think it was the Texas Guard unit, not Guard unit, Texas Marine Reserve unit, like 225 or something.
If I can jump in, I know exactly who it was. It was Battalion 23rd Marines, because the reason I know that is because that ended up being my reserve unit once I left active duty. And I remember them talking about hit in that time frame. So
so I was in the initial push in the hit with those guys. That was exciting. I mean, it was like first time in combat, you know. Scared Lance Corporal Stevens was they gave me a set of 7 Bravos and put me in a Humvee and said, you know, you're going to be one of the drivers into the city during the initial push. You know, I was driving my sick team in, and you know, we went in and we ended up we set up a fire support position up in I think what used to be the college there, by the traffic circle. And I mean, it was dynamic for me. I mean, the first time I've been in combat. So, you know, that was a good time. We spent 30 days there, and then we got retrograded back to Al Anbar, back to what's that base? Al Assad. And then we got moved to Fallujah, and we did a protective service detail for the remainder of the deployment. So the last like 6 months of the deployment, we did PSD for a 2-star and a 1-star, the mess generals. So Major General Johnson and General Patton at the time, not the World War II Patton, but a different Patton. So that was cool. I got to see a lot of different things, different stuff on that deployment. And then we came back from that one, and we deployed again, and we did a quick workup and deployed in February of 06. At that point, I was a corporal, and I became the team chief for the team that I was on. So which was, you know, atypical at the time for an 06 to be a team chief. Usually the team chief was an 08, but it's what it is, you know. And I deployed, on that deployment, we did a lot of military transition teams. So we worked with some of the Marines that were on, I think, like Alpha Street up in Fallujah. We worked with those guys doing just MTT stuff. And then we worked with 2 different SEAL teams on that deployment too, just doing some of their support for some of their raids that they were doing in the cities, just giving them air support. So it was a good look at different units. You know, that's kind of my whole time at Anglico was kind of like a searching of. I like Anglico to the fact that it wasn't really a conventional unit. It had more of a special operations mindset where we were pretty dynamic. We were small teams. We had to be able to change quickly because we could get quickly retasked to different units doing different mission sets. And so that kind of gave me a berth of a look at a lot of different units. So I kind of, you know, at the end of my 3rd deployment with Anglico, I realized that, you know, I wanted to try to enter special operations. So after my 2nd deployment at Anglico, we got back from that one, and I kind of went into a school phase. I went through Army Airborne School in December of 2006 down at Fort Benning, just basic static line course. So that was interesting. That was an introduction to the regular Army, which made me appreciate being in the Marine Corps. And then after that school, I went to SEER School up in Brunswick, Maine. So at the time, before Brunswick closed, we went up to Brunswick for survival, evasion, resistance, and escape school, which was kind of cool because it's, you know, I'm from Maine originally. So by the time we got up to the training area for like the evasion portion, they handed us maps and they kind of gave us an orientation of where we were. And I'm like, that stream I used to fish as a kid. I'm pretty sure I can get home from here. I never tried it though, because, you know, I think they probably would have failed me out of the course if I had just, you know, egressed back to my house. So, But that was a fun course. I timed it right. I went in April, in the springtime. So there's plenty of food in the woods to eat, you know, being a Maine boy, I knew what I could and could not eat. But that was a good course.
So
and
did
then
you,
I got
when you went down there, was that like, does Anglico routinely get allocations to go to those courses, or were those like re-enlistment incentives, or?
Yeah, we typically, I don't know if it's changed since. We had an airborne mission, so we were allocated a certain number of schools per quarter or whatever, however they allocated it out. So, but it was competitive. You basically had to be the top P tier. They had an airborne PFT that you had to do. Of course, the one that the Anglico had was like twice as hard as the one the Army actually implemented when you got down there. So, I mean, you don't want to fail Army schools coming there as a Marine. So, you know, the standards are a lot higher getting down there. So it wasn't like any issues passing the Army PFT once you got down there. But yeah, we had SEER slots. I had a slot to Ranger School too, but one of our deployments just got pushed forward, and so this obviously got canceled. But we had a lot of slots. Like some guys went to RSLIC course for, you know, advanced, reconnaissance and surveillance and stuff like that. So you got, you know, a good choosing of different schools that you could potentially go to if time permitting. So we were pretty busy back then. You know, it was 7 on, 7 off pretty much for the deployment cycle there when I was there. And then my third deployment was from September 07 to April 08. And then that was kind of one of those deployments that was broken up. We started in Havania with a MIT team there, but there wasn't hardly anything going on there during that deployment. We were doing a lot of ISR, so just running aircraft up and down the main routes and providing security for the MIT teams and stuff. So it was pretty boring. And then they switched us, I think it was like close halfway through the deployment. We went up to Diyala province. They moved one of the Marine MIT teams up there. And so we followed them up, and Diyala at the time was pretty busy. It was an Army AO, but some of the same problems. You know, IEDs were huge. So, but I mean, it wasn't too bad. You know, and I got back from that one, and at the time, MARSOC was kind of in its infancy. You know, and I think it stood up in 06. When I got back in early 08 was when they were starting to set up a lot of the support sections in the Special Operations Support Group. So they had decided that they wanted basically a fires control platoon that would basically be a platoon of JTACs that would then go support the teams for Marine Special Operations teams. So luckily at the time, I had a buddy that was over there already, and he got me orders over there, even though, at the time I wasn't a JTAC. And typically, for Marine JTACs, you have to be an 0861 to be a JTAC. So it's a fire support, billet. Typically it's, the echelon of March is, fire support, and then you get into the JTACery. So
Ryan,
but that's kind of
for like the civilian viewers that are watching, can you kind of explain like what exactly a JTAC is? Because it's very, very important. And if you guys don't know, like artillery is the king of battle, and air support, but all that is all coordinated by one guy or a team on the ground that's, calling in that stuff. And, it's just absolute force multiplier. So if you don't mind just kind of explaining what that is for the viewing audience.
Yeah. A JTAC stands for Joint Terminal Attack Controller. So that's basically the easy way to explain it is like when I was in Marine Special Operations, I was the guy on the ground with a small man team with, basically, for MSOT was usually anywhere from 8 to 20 guys. So you're the one guy on the ground that coordinates all aspects of fire control. So, You're controlling close air support. You're controlling any aircraft that comes in and out of the stack overhead of your target. You control artillery, mortars, HIMARS, anything that really enters your airspace, you're going to have control over. So you call in CASEVACs and resupply missions. You do CDS drops, which is control delivery system. So basically, an aircraft comes overhead to drop you supplies. You'll coordinate and control that aircraft into your airspace so they can drop a bundle of equipment to you. So there's a lot of different aspects of it. Kind of the JTAC's like the guy that coordinates it all. They have FOs. So FOs are like the 0861 guys that just call in artillery and naval gunfire and stuff like that. And then they also have what's the other one? It's not quite. Anyway, it escapes me. They've probably changed this since I got out anyway. Yeah, that's the basics of it.
Awesome, appreciate it.
And then so I got pulled over. So yeah, that kind of goes back to the like my own MOS. Not typically become is someone that would become a JTAC or be allowed to, but that was kind of my progression of my entire career. Having guys tell me that, no, you can't do that. You're not the right MOS. Like, that's not your career path. You should do this and that. And, I took it with a grain of salt. It's like, well, I want to do this. I'm going to try and see if I can fit this round peg in the square hole. So that was kind of my entire career, doing, trying to do what I wanted to do that I felt was, going to be best for mission success and for my career, and to help the guys on the ground out. I really like supporting the small teams and doing the JTAC stuff. So I got orders to Marine Special Operations support group in like July of 2008, and I moved over there and went straight to get certified for a joint terminal attack controller. So I went to Special Operations Terminal Attack Control School. And at the time, that was out in Yuma, Arizona. It was a special operations course. So the Marine Corps has a different course they send the Marines through to get their JTAC qual. So I was doing the special operations school to do that, just because I was outside the MOS. And then I attached quickly right after that to my first Marine Special Operations Team, 8212. In March of 2009, we deployed to Afghanistan.
If I can just jump in real quick, because I remember talking to you, and you and I were speaking before this interview, and you had told me that your first team that when you got to MARSOC, was the guys that were in Afghanistan. They got in a shooting, and I had interviewed Major Fred Galvin on my show, and those were his guys. And I remember you describing to me kind of like the atmosphere with them when you first got on deck. If you don't mind, dabble into that.
Yeah, so a lot of those guys I think were already gone when I got there. So I was technically like the second Fox company that was getting ready to go out. So I got there. I think I got to the teams 3 or 4 months before they actually deployed. I didn't get to do a full workup with them. They had already done their shooting package, and probably some of their we were getting ready to do the surveillance portion and stuff like that. Initially, I got put with Team 3 for a portion of the workup before they ended up switching me to Team 2. And that was just basic team dynamics. They had an extra JTAC that they got called up on Team 3, so they moved me to Team 2. It was but prior to that, those guys, were, going through. First Fox company was going through a huge investigation for the stuff that happened in Jalalabad. I can't speak to that. I wasn't there, but it was interesting trying to integrate into a team that had all that stuff going on, and I had no idea. All I knew was there was an investigation going on. I didn't know that whole story until like years later, and I was like, oh man, that makes sense why they weren't they didn't like welcome me with open arms. But you know, typically early in the MARSOC days, the shooters were you know, force recon guys that got pulled over anyway. Those guys were the real deal. They were battle hardened, and they were on mission, man. They were good to go. So I was fortunate. I got put with a really good team. The team leader and team chief were rock solid. So I couldn't ask to have been put with a better team during that deployment, because like I was just a fresh dude, JTAC. Like I hadn't even dropped the bomb yet, you know. So, but it was a good deployment for the most part. You know, we battled it out pretty good. And then I write about a couple of the missions in the book. And then you know, I talk about one of the chapters in the book is about one of the battles we go through, and you know, the fratricide incident that I had, and I called airstrike in on my own position. I go into detail in the book about that. So after that deployment, I transitioned back to Germany, because I got wounded during that deployment, and then I got back to the States eventually. And you know, fortunate enough, I healed up quick, and then I went to multi-mission parachute course in June of 2010, and that was the Marine Corps free fall course. So that was out in Coolidge, Arizona. And then after parachute course, I deployed again with 8212. This time it was a little bit different mission. So the first deployment we did mostly, we were the commando team. So we were attached to the commando unit for the Afghan forces. So the Afghan commandos are basically the special operations side for the Afghan forces. So we did direct action, basically direct action. So we were doing capture kills, and then we were also we would do large sweeps too, through villages and stuff too. Like, but it would be a big force. Like we had one operation called Operation Red Thunder that we did that had it was 100 special operations guys, and then about 900 Afghan forces, and we went into one of the villages just north of Helmand Province and swept through. And then some of the other stuff we did was we worked with the DEA fast teams and did basically joint missions with those guys. They would bring, sometimes we'd use our air and sometimes we'd use their, they had Department of State helicopters. So it was, you know, the old Hueys and some MIs. And those guys, I mean, those were like crusty Vietnam pilots that they're like, oh, you want to go there? I'll put you right there. No problem. And it's like, oh, geez, I don't even think you could drive a car in there, man. He's like, oh, we got it. I'm like, oh, okay. They were good pilots, and you know, so it was interesting. Like they did things differently, but we did mostly for the DA fast teams. We did drug raids, stuff like that, which is interesting. So especially with the way that the Afghan all played out, but yeah, it was interesting.
Yeah, I actually got to work with some of those guys as well, especially those Afghan commandos. They were like, these guys were different. They weren't like your typical run-of-the-mill Afghan soldiers, right? They were actually like kind of squared away, locked on dudes. We were doing drug interdiction stuff as well. But what were your biggest? This is your first deployment to Afghanistan at this point, right?
Yep.
Okay, so what was your biggest takeaways in terms of like the differences between Afghanistan and Iraq?
My visual on Iraq was just a little different because, I was in places where that just wasn't as heavy fighting or dynamic. And for me, Afghan was like, they're playing for keeps here. The terrain's a lot different. The culture is different. And these guys are willing to die. So, it was just different. Different fighters.
Yeah, it was my biggest takeaways were just different because I was in the initial invasion in 03 and then went back in 04, and it was just like there was a lot of urban combat and stuff like that. But then I go to Afghanistan, it's all in 2004 we were rolling around in up armored Humvees even as an infantry line company, and then I get to Afghanistan and it's almost entirely like dismounted, like dudes are doing foot patrols and stuff like that in rural areas. We had some vehicle operations too, but it was just a different AO for us down in Helmand.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I get what you're saying now. Yeah. Yeah, mostly my Iraq experience was a sprinkling of rolling with the SEALs. So they pretty much they did up armored movements, but they also did mostly helo stuff. But everything that other than that in Iraq, it was vehicle mounted. And then the foot patrols that we were doing were in mostly areas that were already, pretty much, conquered. You're just doing presence patrols at that point. And then Afghanistan was definitely the dynamic portion of you're flying in and flying out. Or like on my second Afghan deployment, we were at a village stability platform. So basically, they're called village stability operations. It's really the same thing that they did in Vietnam. They just slapped a different name on it and was hoping that it would work better. So basically, they'd put a special operations team into a village, whichever village they deemed was needed the hearts and minds one. And then basically you go into that village, fight the enemy, and then start doing building projects and stuff to build the community up. So that village stability platform we went to had just been inserted up in Dari Boom, which funny story. My first Afghan deployment, we were on a DEA raid in Dari Boom, and that was the mission that our helicopter crashed on exfil, and we lost a couple SF dudes, and all the 160th pilots perished in the crash too, and then we lost a couple DEA agents, and that was a crazy mission. It's kind of like one of the ones you look back on and you're like, man, should I have done that? We called in HLZ Black on exfil and basically brought the 160th MH-47, so the big birds in right next to the bazaar that we had cleared, and we basically, it was a big drug den, and we were getting hundreds of thousands or hundreds of pounds of heroin and other drugs, and there was weapons. It's basically a weapons bazaar and drug bazaar. And on exfil, from what they say for the investigation, the pilots either browned out in their nods on exfil because it was just really fine dust. And by the time that they realized where they were about to hit the mountain that was just north of the bazaar. So they overcorrected and put the aircraft down onto the bazaar. I was in the first aircraft that took off, and the second one was the one that crashed. So it took a little while. Once we got up in the air, we kept circling. I'm like, this is weird. Like, I was on headset, so I could hear what the pilots were saying, and then what the other aircraft in the stack were saying. So, but it was like pretty garbled, and people were talking fast because things were happening. And then it was clear that Chopper 2 went down, and then we were like, hey, reinsert us so we can reestablish security around the crash site and start pulling these guys out. So we reinserted. I was the first one off the chopper when we reinserted, and I had the AC-130 spot the crash site, and we just ran to the crash site about 300 meters to the crash site. And by that time, the survivors had pretty much pulled everybody out. The aircraft was cooking off, and then we basically set up security, and then I got put to work. I mean, we had, prior to exfil, we had already done a bunch of engagements on guys that were trying to basically attack our position. We had RPGs and machine guns shot at us, and we find out later these guys were actually running nods. I don't know if they were running like old cameras where they could see IR and stuff, or if they had like the first gen nods. But I was up on a building spotting, marking targets with an IR pointer, and they were like marking me with tracers so they could see me. So once we got the crash site secured, we started evacing guys. We ended up evacing, I think, 26 guys to the first chopper. So the 160th pilot, God rest his, man, he was a good pilot. He stayed on deck with blades turning for the entire time that we moved guys out of the crash site to get him onto his bird. And he was 300 meters away. And we had guys coming trying to attack the bird and attack us. Like they were shooting their miniguns from the ground at guys, and I was matching with AC-130 aircraft and then A-10, doing A-10 gun runs on these guys. And I mean, if he hadn't, I mean, he was out of fuel. He's like, I'm out of fuel. Like, I need to take off now. And like, luckily he stayed a little bit longer. And we got, I think, like 26 guys out that were wounded, and got them out. And then we had another medevac chopper come in a little bit later to pull one more guy out. And then we had to dig out the rest of the bodies in the aircraft. So we had, I find out later, this was, I think, after my second or third MARSOC deployment, I was going through another, a different level of the SEER school at MARSOC, and one of the instructors was talking about a mission, and he's like, yeah, all the MARSOC guys got called in missing in action, and I was like, I think that was my mission, and he's like, oh, so I got to, but it was kind of cool because he was working the desk back at like the jock at a higher level, doing kind of the mission planning for any of the personal recovery missions. So any guys that got killed and missing, or anybody that got put mission into action, they would spin up all their assets to come get these guys. So it was kind of cool seeing it from his perspective, and then being able to tell my perspective on the ground, like how that all went down. So it was a long day, and eventually we got everybody out and back home. So it was a rough deployment. We lost a lot of guys. We were partnered on that first MARSOC deployment with 7th Group SF dudes. So it was a good deployment. It was kind of like we had gotten MARSOC, Fox Company had gotten in trouble their first deployment, which was all bogus. But so the second tour, they basically partnered us with another SF for whatever reason, just to But it ended up working in our favor because we were able to get a lot more done because we had more SF, more special ops guys to do the same mission. So, and then. So my second MARSOC deployment was in basically the first of 2011. We went back to Dari Boom, and that's when we were doing the village stability operations. And so that was completely different. So no high level raids, no no kicking indoors at night, no helo insertions, not really any of that. It's more of, the village that we got put in it was a dynamic village. Like there's a lot of bad guys there. The team that we replaced was, they were tired. I mean, they had gotten moved during their deployment to Dari Boom to set up a VSP like a couple months before they were getting ready to retrograde, which I think about it now and I'm like, that had to have been demoralizing to just like pick everything up, reinsert, and then try and establish a foothold in an area that does not want you there. And they put us in the most disadvantaged position in the valley. So it was basically a north-south running valley with mountains surrounding us, mountains going up to, 4,500 feet on one side. So, you're basically surrounded and they can look down into your platform and shoot at you. So it was a great spot. I'm sure some officer picked it for us. So that was interesting. We got in there and then we basically had to reestablish what we were actually doing because the initial team was trying to win hearts and minds before the battle was won. I mean, so that we basically kicked out our Army civilian, whatever those guys are, the CA teams that try to do contracts and build stuff. We kicked them off our FOB, our platform, and told them to go home because we had to start fighting some dudes. So for that deployment, all we rolled around in was side-by-sides, four-wheelers, and dirt bikes. So that was fun. I mean, it was hairy, but there wasn't an IED threat there either, so you're not worried about getting blown up as much. It was mostly small arms, machine guns and RPGs and stuff like that. That was a fun deployment. Not a lot of bomb dropping, but it was pretty dynamic. We got to do a lot of different things, and towards the end of it, we pretty much killed all the bad guys. So it's pretty quiet. We found out some of the villagers, they called us the white ghosts in the valley because we would sneak up on them at night. And but yeah, so that was a fun deployment. And then after that, I got back from that deployment and I went to Army Pathfinder School in September 2011. And that was probably the hardest military school I ever went through was Pathfinder. And that's just an Army course that in the Army, they have Army Pathfinders, that's their primary MOS. So basically those guys are, you could think of like World War II, the pre-jump in invasion. But those are the guys, the first out of the aircraft to set up the DZs or the LZs for drop zones and stuff like that. Those are the initial, pathfinders that go in. So it's a hard course. You learn. We did like sling load operations, and then also landing zones, drop zones. I'm sure I'm forgetting some other stuff, but it's mostly a book course. You have a couple. The last week you do some field time, but in the course when you're sitting in the classroom the first day, they say, look to your left, look to your right. Those guys aren't going to be here next week or by the end of the course. And they're right. It's a hard course, Luckily, I don't know how the heck I got through it. I wasn't smart enough to get through it, but somehow I wiggled my way through it. And then from there on, I went to my last team. So this I went to a couple other schools. I went to some joint targeting schools after that too at Dam Neck in Virginia. Mostly JTAC related courses just to make me a better, more proficient bomb dropper, really. Just advanced targeting and battle damage assessment, stuff like that. Pretty boring stuff, but needed for what I was doing. And then after that, basically I screened out. I'm getting ahead of myself. So then I deployed again. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Then I deployed again on my final deployment with MARSOC to the Helmand Valley in March to November 2012, and we were at a at a bastion. We were doing the commando mission on this one too, so kind of the same thing as our first deployment, only the Helmand Valley, which that's the real deal. Those guys like to fight. That's probably the most dynamic battles that I've been in was in the Helmand Valley. I mean, our first mission in there was an insertion mission for a 3-day op where we would be running overnight in different compounds throughout the 3-day mission. And our infill was hot. Like, I get out of the back of the aircraft, 160th guys let us out, and as soon as they take off, their gals are letting loose, and I'm trying to match with the aircraft to drop, and yeah, they were right on top of us on that. And that was pretty much all of the Helmand. Those guys are ready to fight, and there's a lot of foreign fighters there too, so it was dynamic. I did I think I was a month or two into that deployment, and I got hit in the face with a grenade on one of our ops. Just unlucky, I guess. I don't know. It was another 3-day op where we had just moved into another compound to run overnight, and I just happened to be walking in the compound when the grenade got thrown over, and I ate it. So I got medevaced off that mission. I ended up the 6-man element I was with, pretty much everybody in that element got wounded with grenades that day. So there was enough to go around for everybody. I was able, I got medevaced back to Bastion, and I was able to finagle my doctors not to send me back to the States. I had broken my bone in my face here, and I had some other wounds, but they weren't too bad, where I was able to talk my way in about them releasing me back to my team. So I was able to finish out that deployment with those guys. And then from there, we retrograded back to the States, and I got, prior to that, during that deployment, I found out that I was selected to go up to DEVGRU to do fire support stuff up there. So when I got back from MARSOC, I had orders already to go to DEVGRU. So I don't. So basically, from there, during that last MARSOC deployment, I met my wife. I met her through a friend on that deployment. She was a Marine too, and she met me right after, like a week or two after I'd been wounded. So, but it was, God has good timing. I needed her then, and she stuck through the 4 next deployments with me, and she was my guiding light for a lot of the stuff that I had to go through with traumatic brain injury and PTSD, and helping me find Christ. So it was God's timing is always perfect. So so after that, I executed orders after a little bit of trouble out of MARSOC. I read about this in the book. We had a guy at the fires platoon with us that during my Helmand deployment, he committed suicide. Chris Goski. There's a chapter in my book about him and how, suicide it's just been something that's it's been an issue through all the military, and then special operations too. And it's just guys, I've been there. I've been to the point where I thought I was going to have to, do a permanent solution for a temporary problem, and That's what it is. But sometimes when you're in that situation, you don't feel like there's a way out. And if, I'm talking to somebody that feels that way, like there's a way out, there's hope. So you got to stick it out, and get some help. And that's what a lot of people just, especially at the time that I was in during that time, nobody talked about it, especially about PTSD and how, coupled with PTSD and traumatic brain injury, how those things affect the way you think and how you feel, your emotions. So it's hard. But, I try to advocate that, there's solutions. I mean, so yeah, so I found out during that deployment that Chris had taken his life. And he was a guy that, he had come back from, he had done the previous deployment with me, when I was on the village stability platform. He was on another team north of us, and he had a rough deployment. He watched one of our EOD techs get vaporized in front of him. So it was rough. He came back and he had a lot of issues. And at the time, I had gotten put in charge of the fires platoon as the fires chief. So, I mean, I was a staff sergeant at the time, but I was, just trying to run the place, until we got a new gunny in. And I identified as like, hey, like this, Chris needs help. Like he needs to be put on the bench for a while. And he had some family issue stuff that really he needed to work through. And, I identified that to leadership. And when I left to go, do the workup with the West Coast team, like everything fell apart. Nobody was listening to him. They were trying to push him through SEER and do other things. And like when he really just needed to be taken care of, like medically and be allowed to heal. And that didn't happen. I think he was pushed into a situation where he thought he there was no way out. And he ended up taking his life. And I write about that in the book about, I was pretty outspoken to the command about how leadership failed. It was a complete failure. And after that failure, there was no ownership, and they covered it up. And they tried to cover it up in the investigation and all this stuff. And so, and I was, I was open about it. I'm like, hey, this isn't right. There needs to be accountability. I mean, this is a life. It doesn't matter if it didn't happen on the battlefield, but it's the same thing. He got killed for decisions that weren't made or were made. So that was rough. I got it was a rough exit of MARSOC because of how vocal I had been. I don't really talk about this too much, but they were basically trying not to let me leave, like execute orders. They were holding up my stuff. It was pretty vindictive what they did. But it is what it is, I have to live with how I acted, and they have to live with what they acted. So it was a little rough exit, but I got, over to DevGru, kind of felt like I was starting anew. And then, at that time, I got put on another, so at DevGru, we get attached to SEAL teams there, and kind of the same mission. I wasn't in the JTAC role per se there at that unit. I was more of a fire support coordination chief. So I was still at JTAC, but my primary job at that unit was mostly training SEALs to be JTACs or doing a higher level coordination. So the guys on the ground, when they're out on their missions, have this fire support that they need. And basically you work integration from like a JOC setting, so a joint operations center, to get those guys the fire support that they need. And that's what I wanted to go and do there. I didn't want to be a JTAC on the ground. Basically after that, like I was good. Like I had got my fill. So I was kind of ready to kind of transition more into a support, mentorship, teaching role. So I kind of, that was what I was attempting to do there. So it was a good time. I did 4 deployments there. We did 2 more Afghan, and then I did a couple of Somalia there. And during my last Somalia deployment in 2005, something happened over there that I was near an explosion over there. We'll just leave it at that. But it like reset something in my head, and it just sent me down a path that, like, medically I didn't know what was going on. I started getting like really bad migraines. I wasn't even that close to the explosion, to be honest. It was just, I think my body was done. On my 9th deployment, I had a really bad drinking problem pretty much the entire time that I was at MARSOC and then in the DEVGRU. And on my 9th deployment, I woke up one day in Somalia and was like, I can't do this anymore. I can't drink anymore. I was drinking myself to sleep every night. So it was, and it was not because I liked drinking. It was the only way that I knew that I could get some sleep and not have nightmares and that stuff. So, but finally, for some reason, by the grace of God, during that deployment, I woke up one morning and I didn't want to drink again. And I haven't picked up a bottle since. But when I got back from that deployment, I told my command that I had a problem, that I was an alcoholic, that I was using painkillers and other stuff to try and just numb my body. Like, my whole body hurt from multiple deployments and broken bones and stuff. And so I asked for help, and I mean, it is what it is. I mean, you find out you're just a little cog in the wheel when you ask for help. I went to rehab. They sent me to rehab, which there's a long story behind that too. We won't get into. Finished that, no problems, and then deployed again to Somalia, and that's when I got injured. And I got back from that deployment, and my contract at that time with DEVGRU was a 4-year contract with the option to do one more additional year. And they asked me if I wanted to stay another year, and I said no. I was like, I want to go back to MARSOC. And I had preference of where I should go or where I could go. And at the time, my wife was a Marine, and she was stationed in kind of the same area, but she would have to drive to Williamsburg every day. So she was driving like 2 hours one way. I wasn't able to like centrally locate because we had alert cycles where I could only be like 45 minutes from work. So it was hard on our family, hard on her. She sacrificed more than I did during this whole thing. The amount of time that she had to spend on the road. And we had our first child before my last deployment, my first son. And that realigns you real quick to what's important in life. And at that time, so we had, coming back from my 10th deployment, I had orders in the system. My wife had orders back to MARSOC. She was an EKMS manager, so she was going to go do that at the regiment at MARSOC, and I was going to go to a comm billet at MARSOC, and I was just going to kick rocks for 5 years and kind of do my time and retire. And that got flipped on its head for whatever reasons. I write about it a little bit in the book, but I won't get into it here. But all those orders got canceled, and basically I was put in a situation that was just, it was unnecessary. And at the time I was in a position where, mentally and physically, I don't think I could continue to serve. So at the time I was fortunate enough to go, I had a slot to NICO, which is, it's a national center of excellence up in Bethesda, Maryland. And basically their main thing is doing trauma, for traumatic brain injury, but they did a lot of the special operators who go up there and basically do a head to toe assessment of your body and just figure out what's wrong with you and what you need to do to realign so you can go back out on target. And once I got through that, and I had a decision in front of me. Me and my wife decided that it was best for us to medically retire. So I got pushed over to Wounded Warrior Detachment in Portsmouth, Virginia, and we spent a year there, just going through the medical board process. And eventually, me and my wife both, by the grace of God, retired from the Marines, August of 2018. And during that transition process it's rough. But I realized that there's some guys that get pushed out of the military, they EAS, and they have like a couple months to figure out what the heck they're going to do when they get out. And I think the biggest factor in that is you got to figure out what your follow-on mission is when you get out. I think that's, when I talk to other veterans, that are kind of wandering, they didn't have a follow-on mission. So they didn't have a purpose, and we need both. We need a mission and a purpose. So I was fortunate that my wife's way smarter than me, and she's like, we had bought a house in 2016 and up in Maine, about 10 minutes from where I grew up. And it was a vacation home is what we were going to use it for. And then maybe eventually, when we hit our 20 to retire back to Maine. But at this time, I was like, we're kind of forced to figure out, what we're going to do. So I sold my house in North Carolina, and Steph was like, man, have you ever thought about farming? And I was like, farming? No. I mean, I didn't grow up farming. Like, we grew up, the only thing I did as a kid was, we made maple syrup and stuff as a family. I was like, I don't know. I was like, you think I'll be busy enough farming, to stay out of trouble? And she's like, oh, you'll be busy. So we decided that we were going to take the farming route. And, man, it's such a blessing. Farming's awesome. It's great for healing, definitely, when you get your hands in the dirt and then you're working with animals and stuff. It's something that I advocate for other veterans to look at when they're getting ready to retire. We need more farmers. The median age of a farmer in Maine is like 55 years old. So we need farmers. And farming looks different for everybody. So, we initially, when we had the year at Wounded Warrior to figure it out, we built our business plan on, basically we're going to do hydroponic farming out of basically a shipping container style vertical grow hydroponic setup. That's kind of what we did our business plan off from. Like, we wanted to be turnkey when we got to the farm. But, kind of towards the end of the process, when we kind of realized, like, well, our farm isn't really a farm. It's a house with a barn, and nothing on the farm has been farmed for 20 years. So we kind of made the decision to build the farm out slowly, just take our time, and then just play around with different things and just kind of find what we like doing. So we started off with chickens, any entry level thing to do when you farm, like just get some chickens, and then you go from there. We got chickens our first year, Scottish Highland cattle that same year in 2018, and then we eventually, now we're doing we do meat chickens, eggs, we do ducks, we have a small herd of Scottish Highland cattle for beef, and then we also do maple and birch syrup, maple sugar. We do some small batch stuff for maple syrup, where we'll take an oak barrel that had, say, peach brandy in it, and then we'll age the maple syrup in that, so it brings out the flavors of what used to be in that barrel. It's pretty cool. And then we do apple cider in the fall. So kind of a little bit of everything, but it's been a blessing. We had, when we got out, when we retired, my wife was pregnant with our second child, and now we just found out last week that she's pregnant with our 5th. So we're turning another page and welcoming, and then hopefully soon we'll be welcoming another to the family. So,
congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. I appreciate you coming on here and sharing your story with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And, just to make that transition from like a freaking Marine warfighter, 10 combat tours, and then you go into, farming out right after that. I mean, talk about a complete 180. And it's just impressive that you've been able to make that transition and build a business, successful business after all this.
Yeah, it's I wouldn't say it was easy, but we definitely had a lot of help along the way during the transition process. They had like the SCORE guys that would help you with your business plan, and there's a lot of resources out there for guys that really want to get into that. There's a lot of nonprofits that help veterans too, but yeah, it's been nothing but a blessing farming. And I think especially the way the world's going, knowing where your food comes from and having a sense of community and a stronghold per se is a good place to be with the way the things are.
Yeah. Man, and just being on the outside and looking in and just listening to your story and you telling your story, it's like you had these dark times and then some sort of outside force would interject, right? So it starts with, you getting in trouble with the law, facing prison time, and then, here comes the Marine Corps. It essentially saves you, right? And then you're in the Marines, and then you go down range, you experience the horrors of war. You start going down dark paths, and then you meet your wife, right? So it's like every time you run into these dark paths, some light is shined into your pathway, and it helps guide you out of that. So, it's just it's an impressive story, and to remind everybody, Gunnery Sergeant here has a book out of the darkness that you can pick on. Is it on Amazon?
No, just eBay, and then my farm website, fullarmorfarm.com.
Okay. I will post links to that down in the description box so that you guys can pick up this book. So, well, Gunny Stevens, do you got any final words before we close this out?
No, thanks for having me on, and to your viewers, God bless you guys.
Yeah, I appreciate you, brother. All right, folks. Well, that's it. Don't forget, check out his book, Out of the Darkness, Gunnery Sergeant Stevens, 10 Combat Deployments with MARSOC, and signing off. Semper Fidelis, keep fighting a good fight.